You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I'm Rachel Kudlak and I'm one of the hosts of the podcast, and I'm joined today by my lovely co-host Amber Wilcox.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Okay.
Yeah, we have another great podcast line to have another survivor on the podcast. Our listeners know we've had a good mix this season, especially of survivors, healthcare folks, everyone in between. I'm really excited for today. Awesome.
Me too. Well, without further ado, do you want to introduce today's guest then?
Yes. And before we get started with our guest, I do just want to shout out Pritzker Hagman Law Firm. The podcast is powered by them today. The Pritzker Hagman Burn Injury Legal Team helps burn survivors and their loved ones pursue compensation and justice throughout the United States. And you can learn more about them and their services at legaljourney.guide. And then, as I mentioned, we have a survivor on the podcast today. We have Grace Athena Flott, who is a painter, arts educator, and burn survivor advocate. She is a member of the Jasmine Johansky Fire Safety Foundation, a Phoenix SOAR volunteer, and a volunteer camp counselor for Camp Yeserb, a camp for burn survivor kids of all ages. She grew up in Eastern Washington State and now resides in Seattle, where she holds drawing and painting classes in her private studio and online.
Welcome, Grace.
Hi, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. Before we dive into a little bit about your art, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about your journey as a burn survivor?
Sure. I was burned in 2011 when I was 20 years old, and I was a study abroad student in Paris. I was extremely lucky to be living there. It was an apartment fire. It was horrific, like anybody else's story. I lost two friends of mine, Jasmine Johansky, who the foundation is named after, and another young woman, Louise Brown, who was Australian. So it was definitely a before and after, before the fire and after the fire. I had 45% burns. I also, significantly for me, I also broke my back and my ankle. So it was sort of like a total body injury. And took probably 2 full years of like intensive recovery. So I was flown back to the States, and then sort of began this long process of now over a decade of moving into what I do now as an artist and teacher, and sort of advocate in the burn community. Integrating the experience. It's definitely been a lot of different things, but I've had a lot of support, and it is one of the reasons why I landed in art. So I feel really grateful for that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing with all that with us. And so I was just going to dive into art, but I did want to ask you a quick question. I hadn't realized that your injury happened abroad. Mm-hmm. So how long were you did you recover in Paris before coming back? It's very unique. And I'd love if you could share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I was injured in Paris and then was there in the hospital for the very initial hospitalization for, I think, 3 weeks before I was medically evacuated in a private jet to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. So yeah, both, like, I experienced two different healthcare systems. I experienced free healthcare in France and not free healthcare in the US. So that was a striking difference. Um, my family had to, I mean, I'm glad that they were able to uh, literally fly over there to Paris to be with me for the initial, injury. But it was wild. Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, that,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine, how your family felt. It's great to hear that they could come over and be with you. But that's not a short plane trip. It's not just a 2-hour plane trip. It's across the country, especially for you being in, the Pacific Northwest. So I'm sure that was a very long plane ride for them.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel super lucky and privileged, and I really did see like a stark contrast between the two healthcare systems. Like when I was living there, it was as a student, and you are required to enroll in the public healthcare option. So I was like triple covered because I had travel insurance and my parents' insurance since I was under 26. So it's just like extremely, extremely lucky.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, thanks again for sharing that with us. So I just kind of want to go back to the beginning, even before your burn injury. So how did you first fall in love with art, and what was that? When did you know you were interested in art and painting?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are artsy and creative when they're kids. I think because we are more allowed to be, right? We are really given license to play, especially as children. And I think that as we get older, that we have less opportunities to do that. And I was a kid who wanted to be an artist when I grew up, but then got interested in the I went to undergrad and took a couple drawing and painting classes, but more on the side, mostly because I just didn't think that it could be a real career. And there's a stereotype about the starving artist, right? Which is just a stereotype. So it was always sort of there as something I enjoyed doing. And it was really after I was injured, that I had one of the moments of clarity where I just thought I need to find a way to make meaning out of this experience. So I had been involved in advocacy through the Fire Safety Foundation that I work with. I had been doing keynote speaking. I was oddly didn't find out about the Phoenix Society or like connect locally for about 6 or 7 years until after my injury. But I had all this other support in my life. And still, I needed, I think, a way of expressing. So it really got started again when I was doing experimental, kind of just like expressive drawings. And then I found a class or a school here in Seattle that trains people to do very realistic drawing, and I just started taking classes, and I was like, wow, like I didn't know people still did this. And I realized that I could actually, make images to make the world kind of a safer place for people that have scars, and realized that I could, make images of myself and my friends, and that this was still possible. So I sort of fell back into it and then fell in love again.
So Grace, I know you said you became an artist after you had the burn injury, but did you find that the art helped with your healing, or do you believe that there was a healing element to kind of what you were doing?
I don't know if there was consciously. I think there's an interesting relationship between art and healing. I think a lot of people think of art as healing, and that's it. They think of it as like therapy. Um, I think of the work that I do as more of a communication tool. I think that it can be healing for viewers. I think that the process of art and art making can be healing. So there's a really awesome book called Your Brain on Art that you guys should check out. And it's this whole field of neuroaesthetics, which is like how, you know, experiencing, I don't know, stimulation or like beauty, like visual, auditory, like sensory experiences can be really transformative for your brain. So it's so like well documented now that like yes, like creativity and engaging in the arts is really critical for healing. And I think I can look back and say, yeah, I was looking for a way to I think see myself in media and see myself in art because we don't, right? Like we just don't. We see ourselves in medical textbooks and we see ourselves as Freddy Krueger. Right. And so we didn't like maybe consciously notice that before our injuries, but certainly, you know, I went through all the feelings of looking at my body and thinking, I'm a corpse, I'm a zombie, like I'm dead. And like still, you know, we live in a very ableist culture. So I think art can be a means of, I mean, a lot of different things, but returning like agency to yourself. I think going through like a medical trauma and losing control over your body, like having that experience of like, I have to rely on this whole healthcare team, but also it's really dehumanizing, right? Like I'm laying naked on a table and they're scrubbing me. Like that's dehumanizing and necessary. So it's just, I think when you create something physically with your own hands, like that is what art is. It is an act of creation. And that can be very powerful. It can be very grounding. And yeah, that I think is like the reason why people should get involved in art.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. I love all of that because, you know, I used to think that, you know, art as a part of more of like the burn survivor healing side of things, I really saw it more of a means of, you know, like almost physical therapy because of using your hands. And, you know, I have scars on my hands. So that was a big thing, like painting and drawing when I was a kid to get that mobility back. But, yeah, what you just shared, I mean, it's so much deeper than that. And I really love that idea of, you know, putting power back in yourself by you creating something, which I just love. Which I know is kind of my next question for you was, I think this ties in really well, is about your new art exhibit called New Icons. So I know a little bit about it from preparing for the podcast, but can you tell our listeners more about that art exhibit?
Yes, I'd love to. A lot of my work is really about body liberation and just exploring this idea of normalcy and how we construct that normalcy and health and beauty and gender. So I've wanted to do this project for a long time. And it's sort of the reason why I got back into art is to do this collaborative portrait project with our community. So with burn survivors. And it is an art series of paintings. There's 7 portrait paintings and 5 small, what I call body maps, which are also paintings, interviews with each subject. And I also hosted a scar print workshop. So the whole project is funded by the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture and has been supported by 2 different artist residencies in the last year, which is awesome. But yeah, it's really to celebrate our lived experience and, you know, take a group of folks who have very little positive visual representation or visual history, and try to do my part, towards expanding that, which is in fine art. And, the arts, like there's a symbiotic relationship between the work that we all make in our studios and what gets put into advertising, TV, film, right? It's sort of how do we shift the culture just a little bit. So I'm really excited about it, and it's going to be opening in Seattle at this place called the Museum of Museums on October 17th. And it's just up for 1 week, October 17th to the 22nd. And I was really happy to find a venue that was very supportive of the project. One of the things that happened when I was proposing the exhibition around Seattle was this reaction. When I would say, I'm doing a project, it celebrates burn survivors. It celebrates people with visible differences, specifically people with scarring from burn injuries. And the first 10, 15 responses very much were like, this would look great in a hospital, right? This would look great in a clinic. I could really see this in the halls of this nonprofit devoted to chronic illness or chronic pain. And I think that we all do a lot of work like within our community, right? Like sort of inside. And like what I'm trying to do is like put it outside, right? Just like a lot of the folks like at Changing Faces. And I know individually, like a lot of us are doing this kind of more activist work. So it's really important to me to find a venue that was an awesome, just contemporary art space that shows a lot of different types of work and is really accessible to the public.
That's awesome. So when it comes to like how you came up with that idea, did a lot of your ideas for the project itself come from the fact that you yourself were a survivor and you felt like this would help obviously impact the community through that? Or you want to tell us a little bit more about like the paintings and kind of the stories behind each of those?
Yeah, I think that, so in art, like if you are painting people, there's always this traditional relationship of, or photography too, like I'm taking your photo, I'm painting you, I have the power, I am the creator. And we as a community lack visibility. But I think it's also a very vulnerable thing, right? To be seen and to be portrayed. Mm-hmm. And I take that very seriously. And it's, yeah, I take it really seriously. So it got started really because I was talking to a friend of mine who is also a burn survivor here in the pandemic in 2020. And I was just like, I'd love to paint you. And that's Claudia, who's in the series. And she's the woman who is 5 months pregnant in the painting, because that's how she showed up on my studio one day. And I was like, I didn't know you were having a kid. So yeah, it really just got started with, I wanted to paint a couple of people that I knew through the community here. And it really became a way of just like having conversations with people, like, what is your experience with scars? What is it like to navigate the world in this body? How does that interact with other parts of your identity? My experience as, especially being burned as like an adult, as a white woman, as a young woman, is really different than a lot of other people's experiences. Mm-hmm. So a lot of like the media that I've seen is, we know, very focused on trauma and the burn story. How did it happen? Right? That's what everyone wants to know. And so the interviews are never like, I'm never like, hey, tell me your burn story. It's really, what kind of media did you see growing up? How do you want to be represented? Mm-hmm. What kinds of stories would you like to see about us? by and large, everyone's just like, we want to be portrayed as normal, right? Like, we don't want the injury to be the number one focus of the portrayal. We want to be seen. We want to be seen as powerful. We want to be seen as, filled with self-love and self-possessed and have agency and be multifaceted. So, yeah, I mean, everyone has a different experience, and I just interviewed his name's Adam, and he talked a lot about just masculinity and being raised with a certain idea of what it meant to be a man, and how his injury, interacted with that and made it, sort of charged in a completely different way than my experience. So I was really interested for a long time in just having that conversation. Like, what does it mean to you to have scars? I think a lot of the spaces that I've been in for burn survivors are focused a lot on the clinical element of recovery and not so much of making meaning. And I'm really interested in like connecting this one injury experience that we have into a bigger conversation about whether it's disfigurement, physical difference, or disability, right? Because they all overlap. And I think there's a lot of power or empowerment, right, in becoming part of that bigger conversation.
For sure. Yeah, and earlier when you shared, just when you were, I guess, pitching the idea, the exhibit to some places, and how they're like, oh, that would be great in a hospital. It's like, well, like you mentioned, that's the opposite. The whole point of doing this is to show, our beauty, and it's not just your mainstream standards anymore. And we work. And we work with Face Equality International, and there's so many individuals, not just in the burn community, but the physical difference community in general, working, for this push. Thinking about even small things to just, and then to big things like Hollywood and main movies. It's so true that there's not enough representation, not just of burn survivors, but any, an amputee. We never see those either. So such a small piece of such a bigger conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, I just met somebody here in Seattle who works at the intersection of like theater arts and disability. And I just was like, wow, like we truly all are in our own silos, like how powerful could it be if we came together, right? Like not just in art across different mediums, but across these different experiences.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And, and you touched on this a little bit already, but I kind of want to talk a little bit more about it. Kind of the idea of, the objectification, and how as an artist or a photographer or a painter or whatever that art may be, you are really, you're not objectifying, but somewhat, of who you're, of the subject of the art. And that can be, that's something burn survivors experience on a daily basis, and not in the art world, but just walking down the street and getting stares from the community. So can you just share a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you for bringing me back to that piece. The antidote to that for me is collaboration, and I'm very conscious of that experience. Like I have experienced it myself, being portrayed by other artists, and it's not fun. So the way that I work is very slow. It's very meditative. It's over months and months. And I want to make a space and like have enough time to build a relationship, because it really is about having a reciprocal exchange and collaborating with the person. So everyone who I've painted is somebody that is in my life that I, was getting to know, was friends with, or am now getting to know through the process of painting them. Everyone is someone that, I'm spending like a year of my life, like back and forth with. So the process is like a commission where we do a big photo shoot, after a series of conversations. One of the conversations might be recorded for the interview, but there's a traditional relationship between, right, artist and subject, which is like, again, I'm just taking your image. I am, in a way, having to objectify like the shapes that I see, right? Like the best of realist painting is really, can we acknowledge that we have bias and then try to just see and observe what we're looking at. So in that way, yes, there's an objectification, right? Where I am noticing the shapes, the valleys, the ridges, the changes in light and shadow, in temperature, in color, in all these technical elements of art. It's very difficult to be, I think, a portrait painter today who is trying to sort of change that kind of relationship, though, with the other side of objectification, right? Because it is ultimately a painting that I created, but can I get consent from the subject, from the participant, really, at every step of the way? So it's never something where I'm like, hey, I just really want to paint you and I don't even know you, just because I like your face, or your face is like interesting to me. Like that feels very like, I don't want to get to know you. I just am exoticizing like your features or something. So people, we talk a lot about just like what goes in the background, right? Like the question I always pose is, what is the message that you want to put out there? Because art lasts a long time. It's going to outlast us. So how do you want to be remembered? How do you want to be celebrated? What is the mood that you want to convey? And most everyone is very much like, I want to show that I'm okay with me. Like, I want to show that I'm good with me. And there might be, and actually quite often, people want some element of nature in the background. There's a lot of like, I think it makes sense. A lot of like grounding, right, and healing is found through connecting with nature. It's also beautiful to look at and to paint. So yeah, I kind of go through like every piece of the puzzle, and we do a lot of like composition studies, and I send them over. We take 600 photos. I narrow it down to like 20 or 30, and then we talk about them. So this is why it takes months, and then it takes months to paint.
So that's awesome.
It's collaboration, and the consent at every stage is really important to me.
It sounds like there's a lot of dedication in your work for sure. Mm-hmm. So I do want to just we have some other questions we want to ask you, but I do want to just mention as well that the new icons exhibit is going to be available for viewing at the Museum of Museums in Seattle, and you said October 17th through 22nd, correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. And if anyone wants to learn more, they can visit also on your website, correct? Do you want to tell everyone your website?
Yeah, my website is my name. So graceathenaflott.com. And some of the works are up right now. And in October, everything will be posted online.
Oh, perfect. So folks can see all of the exhibits. Awesome. That's
the
really
interviews. Cool. Yeah, the interviews will be posted ideally also in conjunction with the show. So Amber, I've interviewed you like 2 years ago, I think, and I still have that interview, and I'm getting
Oh,
them
that's awesome.
edited this summer,
Very cool.
which is another whole process. So yeah,
Well,
lots of components.
I'm very excited to see that and can't wait to see the exhibit when it does get posted in October. So with that, we'd love to know about what other exhibits you've worked on. So I know this is one of many things that you've done, but do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other projects that you've worked on in the past?
Yeah, I like I said, work sort of around this question of, what is normalcy? How do we define normal, like whose body belongs? How are we ascribing value to different bodies? And I was trained in this like classical painting, so which is sort of using the language of representation, right, to really tell a story, right? It's almost like an illustration. So the last show I did was, it was called exposure therapy, which is a therapy that I've actually done. I don't know about you guys, but it was, yeah, I was early on in my recovery. I worked with a therapist who we were working on PTSD, and we did exposure therapy, which was really interesting and very helpful at the time. But the show, the sort of other idea of exposure therapy is this act of letting go of defenses and really being seen. So it was a body of work that I put together during the pandemic and showed last year here in Seattle at another gallery. And it was a series of kind of people in interior spaces that were pretty like intimate. So a lot of, people like in the tub or little snippets of like people's legs seen in like a room. So I like this idea that, or I guess what I'm always playing around with is that idea of who's doing the looking and who is looking back, right? Who is staring back? What's that relationship between me and the subject? Like we live in a time where we are like always online, right? We're always like posting a selfie. Whether we know it or not, like we are very much all curating our own presentation. So I think that old idea of, I'm like the artist or I'm behind the camera and you're my subject and like I'm going to exploit you is sort of over, because most people have this ability to kind of reverse the dynamic. And then, yeah, I just think it's like more complicated. So
For sure.
yeah.
Well, and you hear that all the time, like, oh, I like my Instagram feed, like I needs to be a certain filter or color to curate, your brand essentially. Which can have, there's pros and cons to giving people the power to do that themselves, because pro, you do have that power. Con, we tend to fall into, we have to be perfect all the time, and we are getting better at that, but people still, for every happy post you see, how many sad posts should there also be? But you don't ever see that side of things.
Yeah. And I think like in art, there's a real offer to slow down and to just look. Right. And so like, yeah, we're not scrolling. We're not just consuming images. Like when you go to a play or you go to a museum or you're just in a class or whatever it is, like it's really an opportunity to slow down. So yeah, I kind of see my work as like a place for people to experience a deeper relationship to what they're looking at.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So I know you shared how you got interested and involved with art, but I'm sure we have some listeners who have either dabbled a little bit in art or aren't sure where to get started. So what advice would you give someone who just wants to explore their creative side a little bit more and get more involved?
Well, you don't have to be good, quote unquote, at art to benefit from it. So just take that out of your mind and throw it in the trash. It's really for everyone. I know like the work that I do is very much like I went through school and was like trained, but I was making stuff before that too, and it was awesome. So yeah, I'm very much artist for everyone. Like I'm sure wherever you live, there are tons of artists, and if there are not, like you can be the artist. There's probably a local art center, like a local nonprofit art center that offers continuing education classes. They probably have scholarships. I think just meetup groups. I think, yeah, there's lots of ways to kind of plug in. What I would also say is just try a bunch of stuff, and probably you're already drawn to a certain thing. Like maybe you like to make beaded jewelry, or like, I don't know. I think even like cooking can be an art, right? Like we talked about just making something with your hands. To me, like art is just like a creative somatic experience. And it is really not about the results. Right.
Except maybe cooking. You don't
Well,
want to
yeah, sure.
I don't want to eat it.
Right. Unless you're on like one of those reality shows where the point is that it's just beautiful and like it's like that. Yeah, that sounds fun too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's lots of ways to get plugged in, but just don't worry about the results and don't stress.
And I see you run workshops of your own, Grace. So do you hold some workshops for the community? Is it that can get involved and learn from you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of different kinds of teaching. I teach one-on-one private lessons. I teach teens and adults at Pratt Art Center here in Seattle at Gage Academy, like different local schools. I teach online, sometimes classes. The most recent, really wonderful workshop that I was just so happy to do was the scar print workshop that I mentioned, and that was part of the grant. So I, in the last 2 years, started taking ink prints directly from my own skin, and they have made their way into some other paintings now. And it's sort of opening up like new kind of visual languages in my own work. But just the experience of literally making art directly from my own skin was really powerful. And I, yeah, ended up getting a group of, I think just 10 or 11 burn survivors here in Seattle together. And we had this like wonderful day where we all made scar prints together, and people who were like, I'm not an artist, I never paint, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, they're sitting there at the glass palette, like mixing the paint, and then they're, you know, rolling it on their arm with the brayer and pressing the paper and pulling it. And they're just like, you know, you like see the light bulbs going off. So yeah, I facilitated that here. And then since that happened, different organizations and actually a couple burn centers have been asking me, hey, can you come out and facilitate this kind of workshop for us too? And so, yeah, that's what I do. That's my plug.
Awesome. I know you shared with me the scar print kind of instructions, and I did it from home here. And I remember doing it and my husband being like, what are you doing? Like there's paint all over you, like all over everything. But we have this beautiful collection, and I have yet to frame them, but this beautiful collection of art prints that like would look really cool. And it's just really neat to see, but also as a good like keepsake as a survivor to show like, or to have that with me of like the evolution of my scars. But yes, it was definitely a messy process, and but it was a lot of fun, and I like came away from it like, oh, that was really fun. So I very much enjoyed it. Yeah, if you haven't checked it out, I definitely would recommend it for sure. So Grace, My question, I guess, is to specifically, I think, for like the female survivor who are learning to accept, their appearances. I think it can be really hard because of like kind of like what Rachel was talking about. Social media, I think, makes it worse for us as well. But what advice would you give them to like accept their new appearance, given you were burned at 20 years old? So I'm sure you had kind of had some identity already. What was that like for you, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, this is such an important topic, and I don't think one that is given the credence that it deserves. I'm not over it. Yeah, like I'm like over a decade in, and I think the scars, like having your skin totally changed, is like a biographical disruption to your identity. It's a major change. And for me, and I've talked now to so many people who have this experience of their scars were sort of a trailhead or an opening into a lot of other body issues that I was raised with or they were raised with. So like just the fat phobia, the ableism, like I grew up in the 90s. It was bad. Like fat jokes everywhere in TV and film. There is one type of woman that is allowed to exist, and she is young, white, thin, able-bodied, conventionally beautiful. She doesn't have scars, and she's blonde. So like, you might have like one or two of those things, but no one has all of them because that person is made up. And we can all know that intellectually, and it's still very hard to sort of emotionally separate yourself from it. So, yeah, I don't know if I have advice. I just would say, like, a lot of people have body image issues. Like, I still have body shame. And it doesn't necessarily go away. I think what's really important is to talk about it, because the silence is what makes it worse.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And burn survivor or not burn survivor, we all go through this. It's not just unique to our community. We just maybe have another layer we have to talk through as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that's some really good advice. So aside from the art and art healing and all of that, was there anything else in particular that maybe helped you on your healing journey, or still helping you on your healing journey, that you'd want others to know?
Yes, so many things. I think, supportive community, number one, get involved. Sharing your experience just lifts the burden, right? It's like we share it and it somehow becomes lighter, and that's the magic. So, I took a long time to do that. I felt like a special snowflake for a long time. And then I started talking to people and I was like, oh yeah, like we got the same shit. So other things that helped were just practically speaking, like I started massage therapy. So just that helped a lot with like my scar pain and flexibility, and also reconnecting to my own body and kind of regaining that sense of agency over my own body. I think movement, like slowly getting back into just things that I enjoyed. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and if you don't hike here, like, right, people kind of look at you funny. So, which is totally not for everyone. Like hiking is like hard.
It's hard work.
It's hard work, but we have enormous access to nature. So that's a big thing for me, is getting outside. Getting outside, getting some sunshine. Again, a resource that's scarce here.
Say whenever it's out, you have to take advantage of it.
Yeah. So just the normal things. I think a lot of therapy. I do internal family systems therapy, which has been awesome. And like I mentioned, I did exposure therapy. Like I've just kind of tried a lot of different things. And I think, just don't give up. Just keep looking for the thing that's going to help, because there is something. There is definitely something for everyone.
So speaking of, I think, advice, you do a lot of work in the burn community to help other survivors. I know that you volunteer for many organizations, including the Phoenix Society and the SOAR program. I heard you also just mention that you have a burn camp you're helping out with as well. So can you tell us why? I think I know the answer to this a little bit, but like, why is it important for you to give back and continue to share that message to other survivors?
Yeah. Oh my God. It's almost hard to answer because I feel like it's so obvious. I just get so much out of it. Like it's the sense of not being alone. And I think in helping other people, whether it's big or small, we just realize that we are not the only ones, right? Like it's about connection. It's about like recognizing our shared humanity. And I think especially, so what I'm about to do next week is go out and be camp counselor at the local burn camp, Camp Iabsut, which has been going on for like over 25 years. I only got involved maybe 5 years ago, but yeah, especially working with, I think, kids, and you see what they're going through. And I've learned so much like about my own experience, just seeing, what is it like to be burned as a child and go through school and go through a lot more, like just a different developmental stage, where I know I didn't experience direct bullying because I was an adult, and very few adults do that. But the stuff that, the kids are dealing with, and also how resilient they are at the same time, is so magical. And to just see or be in a place where, 90% of everyone at the camp has scars, and it's like going to World Burn. It is like nothing else. It is like feeling like I am here in my home. So yeah,
it helps to be among others that are like us, I think, for sure. So
yeah, you don't realize how much work it is to be like a spectacle in public, right? When you're the only one with scars, until you are in a space where that is taken off of your shoulders. And then you breathe.
For sure. Well, I know we're coming up on our time here. So before we do ask you, our last two questions, I just want to ask, what's next for Grace? I know your art exhibit is about to open. And so anyone who's local, we encourage you to go visit in person and check it out. But aside from that, what's next for Grace, and how can our listeners keep up with you?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I know that I'm going to keep working on all these different topics. And it's just sort of this like, how is the art going to change, over time? It's already changed so much. I am going to keep teaching. I think after an exhibition, there's a lot of just like thinking about how it went, and then like what's next. I just did an artist residency down in Sonoma County, the Chalk Hill Artist Residency, where I was looking at actually a different aspect of like, what does it mean to look normal? So using the scar prints and combining them with different patterns that I'm seeing in nature, because I actually see like the exact same shapes, right? Like in tree bark, or like I see kind of topographical lines, like a map in there. And I like this idea of placing, something that disfigurement, right, is sort of stereotyped as quote unquote unnatural, next to something literally from nature, right? And you see like this resonance So I'm interested in that piece of it, the way that nature heals itself, the way that it looks, and how we are actually just a reflection of that. So
That's
that might
beautiful.
be, yeah, might be a future body of work. We'll see.
That's awesome.
Very cool. Well, we so appreciate your time here, but before we let you go, we always ask our guests two final questions. So for me, I think the biggest thing I'd like to know from you, Grace, is what advice would you give to somebody who's just been injured, whether it's someone who's young or as the case of, you were in your 20s at that time. What advice would you give to someone who's been through a similar experience that you have been?
I would just say that you're not alone and you're loved. Like you're going to be okay. And it's really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
And like, we're all here for you, like whenever you are ready, we're here for you.
Definitely. Yeah. Great advice. So our final question, it is our Phoenix partner question, which is sponsored by the Pritzker Hegman Law Firm, a nationally recognized personal injury firm helping clients throughout the United States. So the question is, what is something you are grateful for today?
Oh, I like that question. I thought you were going to ask about the burniversary.
No, we mixed them up for season 3. I know our guests are like, wait, what are you asking me? I wasn't prepared for these. If you want to share that too,
yes.
we'll take it.
No, I like this question. Gosh, what am I grateful for right now? I'm really grateful for this conversation because it's something that, is so rare, I think. Maybe for you it's your job, but all of us are sort of out here satelliting. And it's just wonderful to connect with you both. I'm also just grateful for coffee. For getting me out of bed.
Coffee makes the world go around.
Yeah.
Yes.
Grateful for coffee and for sleep and for, this day and my family and this life.
So wait, now I need to know though, do you do anything special for your burniversary? Because I'm curious.
Now you open the can of worms. For
oh my God. No, I was hoping to dodge this question.
Okay, we'll edit this part out. We'll edit it out.
It's because I don't really do the same thing every year. It just changes all the time.
Yeah. I've had myself doing that too.
Yeah. My burn anniversary is also just there is a lot of grief because 2 people that I loved died. And I know that there's just a lot of things to process around that for everyone who experienced that. So I've done different things honoring that. I have also taken the more celebratory, route sometimes. And what I mostly do is avoid social media. Because I find it really overwhelming to process other people's grief en masse, like through a soundbite on social media. So
I think you bring in that additional layer because you specifically dealt with that level of right, like grief associated with your trauma. Like we as survivors experience grief of our own, but also experiencing grief of those that we've lost too can be really difficult. So but I love that you just switch it up because I know every year, like not every year I feel the same way about it. And some years I go into it feeling like this was a sad day for me. And then others I'm like, well, I'm here. Right. So I think it's a really important message that whatever you feel like doing that year.
Yeah. And it's been, I think the piece that is like happening right now is actually the more you step into the burn survivor identity and the more I'm talking about it, especially through my work, the more public kind of facing stuff I'm doing, it can be like, it has been really exhausting.
It's draining.
Sort of, because I'm doing a lot of the education and a lot of the explaining. And like, that's why this is so nice because, right, like, hopefully there'll be other opportunities to share about the work, but it is like very much like what is burn? What is that?
Yep.
So
Sure.
yeah, just appreciate this a lot.
Well, we appreciate having you on today's episode, and we encourage anyone that wants to learn more about Grace to visit her on her website, which we'll put in the show notes as well. Grace, we wish you the best of luck on your upcoming exhibit as well, and can't wait to see those additional images on the website in October when they get posted. With that, we want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.